We're about to sit down and have a fireside chat. This is Makinde. He's the founder of DevColor. How many have heard of DevColor? Hey, this is your tribe. So we're going to talk about his pretty cool journey on why he built it and his perspective on what works and what matters when it comes to addressing diversity in tech.
Great.
So, as you can see, there's some recognition of the work, obviously, that you're doing. And you know, the title of this is really why you quit startups to build DevColor. I know you and I were talking, you know, in the back. And I don't know if those of you know Makinde's journey, but he was employee 300 at Facebook. He was the 60th employee at Dropbox, and I believe the first engineer at Dropbox, or one of the first?
It was one of the early engineers on the website. Yeah.
And built much of their website infrastructure, and then was the 150th employee at Pinterest. So you've been at a lot of big logos at very exciting times in the organization when they were still defining what they are and how to become what they are. And would just love to kind of hear, what was that journey like? What took you from there to wanting to build DevColor?
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for having me here. I think that's a really good recap of my career, although it does skip over what I did in between all of those places, which is part of what led me to DevColor. After I left Facebook, I moved to Kenya for a few months and worked at Bridge International Academies that builds low-cost primary schools in developing countries. And then after I left Dropbox, I was a high school track coach for 6 months. Fully remember the Titans. That's how I remember it, at least. And then, yes, after Pinterest, DevColor. So for me, I think each time I left a tech job, I was sort of searching for how can I make sort of a really tangible impact on people's lives. And DevColor was the first time that I was able to really do that, make an impact, and also use this software skill that I'd been developing for the last 10 years.
I mean, the man has many skills. Like track coach. Okay. I feel like there's a story in the story, but we're going to keep moving. So can you talk a little bit about, for those who maybe aren't as informed, what is DevColor? And maybe we can use that kind of springboard into why you have such a unique structure, too, and how you approached it. So I'd just love to learn more of like what led you to the way you structured it as well.
Yeah, so for those who don't know, DevColor is a network of Black software engineers who help one another grow into industry leaders. And this sort of specific structure in there is that we are all about our members helping one another. Like point blank, that's our goal, that's our metric, is around actually how many times they say thank you for the help that they've gotten. That's like literally what we count. We call it props. And the reason we do that is, I was thinking about how to have more impact, and what I realized is I looked around and said, gee, there are a lot of other Black engineers that I'm helping day to day, right? Whether they are coming out of school, and I'm helping them figure out what internships to do or how to get a job, or I'm helping them think about, should I stay at my company and try to become a manager, or should I start my own company? And I realized that I had a lot of wisdom that I'd built in my career, and I was doing my best to share it with those around me. But a way to have even more impact was to try to get everyone else to do that same thing. So selfishly, that's what DevColor is. It is a group of people who want to do nothing more than help other people in that group. And that's sort of the culture change that we're trying to drive.
Can you talk a little bit about, one of the things that I think when we think about, so Jez gave a great talk around the myths of DI this morning and talked about kind of societal norms and how that's often the root of some of the discrepancies people use. And I think one of the societal norms, especially around women and people of color, is, a lot of service from behind the scenes, right? A lot of but there's sort of stigma, I would say, for women to be ambitious, and ambition is often viewed differently when women are being ambitious. But DevColor is your criteria, I don't want to give it away, but I'd love you to talk about your criteria of what someone has to be in DevColor.
Yeah, it's really interesting. We did an event yesterday and people were asking me this question, and it really comes down to two things. One, are you going to join the group and be ambitious? Right? Are you going to set aggressive goals for yourself? Or are you going to try to become a VP of engineering or start your own company or be a senior level individual contributor? So that's the first criteria we look for. And second is, are you going to help other people when they reach out to you? And when you talk to a random DevColor member, it is clear, like, everyone will say, like, I can ask anyone in this group for anything at any time. They'll drop what they're doing and they'll meet with me for 30 minutes. And I think it's really that culture that makes the organization special and is what we've built on.
Can you talk a little bit? So one of the key themes in the opening, I was quoting Paulo Coelho, and he says the challenge will not wait. And so we're talking about, when it comes to diversity in tech and women in tech, this is about the nature of commitment. And, are we going to stay committed in that long-term strategy? And DevColor has commitment requirements too.
Yeah, so we're not an organization that you join because you just want to hang out with other people. When you join DevColor, you're committing to meet with your squad, your group of 8 engineers that we think are a good fit for you. You're going to meet with them every month, and you're going to follow a pretty strict schedule about sharing what's going on in your life, about being vulnerable, about what challenges you're facing, and sharing stories from your own life about what you've learned and how you've grown. And you will do that every month without fail. We have members who have a family, have children. They show up and are at their meetings. We have people in every scenario.
Wasn't there someone called in from where? It was like somewhere crazy.
I dialed into a squad meeting this year from South Korea.
His sister was competing in the Olympics. No big deal.
I dialed in from the venue. I was like, I'm cold. I'm going to stand to the side, and I'm going to get on this video conference. So no, our members are super committed, and that's what sets us apart, is that everyone is committed, everyone is there to help, and you can rely on that when you reach out to someone.
So let me talk a little bit about, dig deeper into this why, right? And, we were talking backstage a little bit around, just some of the things you were learning from performance reviews and just, why DevColor? What is that gap that you're looking to fill? What is that additional resource you're looking to provide, and why?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. So much of what matters in your career is who you can depend on for that right insight or that right advice when you need it in your career. And that's going to be different for everyone. It's going to be different for you at different points in your career. But if you have a really solid network around you, they can help guide you through your career. And what I was noticing is a lot of my friends had gone to MIT, they'd gone to Harvard, they're working at Google, right? So you think they're all set. And then I see them stagnating in their career, right? They got their first promotion, and then they'd been at that next level for 5 years, for 6 years, right? And they're surrounded by people who could help them, but they don't feel comfortable connecting, they don't feel comfortable reaching out, right? So that is really the gap that DevColor is trying to fill, is to say, hey, come to us, come join this network, and we will connect you to people that you can count on, who will push you to set goals, and who will hold you accountable for reaching the goals that you do set. And I think that network is a really big factor in what determines how far you go in your career.
It's so true. It's so tomorrow, Nora Denzel is one of our speakers on women power in the boardroom, and she's a serial board director, just one of my favorite thought leaders on women in boards. And she has this saying that, please quote her, she says, it's not who you know, it's not what you know, it's who knows what you know. And so that importance and the power of networking and having sponsors obviously is really important. I'm wondering how you think about gender diversity, right? And how you thought that through and how you're building DevColor, but also what's your point of view on the role men need to play when it comes to making sure we are creating environments where women can thrive?
Yeah, absolutely. Honestly, this is something I was completely oblivious to when I started DevColor. I started DevColor with every single black software engineer I knew in the Bay Area, and we had 11 people. And I think 2 or 3 were women, and from day one, they said, hey, there aren't enough women in this group. I still feel like an outsider, right? And it's something we focused on as the org has grown. Actually, when we were recruiting new members, we have someone specifically focused. It's basically like tech recruiting, where we were trying to find black women to join the organization. And our goal is to have 1/3 of our members be women. So it's important that our group and every other group be a place where everyone feels like they can belong. I mean, I guess it's like typical what a company would say is like it's hard, but I think we're doing a pretty good job. And we've also done a bunch of specific things in the organization to make it a more comfortable space. So in your squad, squads right now are either all guys or an even mix of genders. So nobody is the only in their squad, which is a lesson we had to learn.
Girl squads?
You know, this is funny. We actually ask on the application which you'd prefer, like all your gender, mixed gender, or it doesn't matter. And I don't, in the entire history of the organization, no more than 3 people have said all my gender.
That's men and women.
Men and women.
Or however people
Biggest
identify.
complaint of guys in all male squads is that they want more women in their squad. Absolutely.
I think there's some women out here that probably joined DevColor. Okay, so when you think about that in your organization, what's your thought on the role men can and should play in, what's the right way to put this? Speaking thoughtfully to men, to other men about D&I and sort of like, so you talked, I think with a lot of grace and humility around like, hey, I didn't know, and I'm on this journey, I'm learning. I'd love to hear like, what are you learning so far, and what do you think others need to learn?
Yeah, it's a good question. What have I learned so far? So much. I think for me it comes down to a couple things. One is listening to the challenges that other people face, right? Like one thing that was relatively new for me over the last few years was realizing that oftentimes women get talked over in meetings. So
raise your hand if that's happened to you.
Yes. I
see your pants.
No, it's a really real reminder, right? That's a very real thing. And I now consciously try in meetings to watch out for when someone is trying to say something. I think actually even backstage, I like stopped myself. I was like, no, I just cut someone off. Like, what did you want to say? Sorry. So I think like just learning those things and learning how you can personally adapt is important. And then also really useful for me is that what I keep trying to do is, because I'm an underrepresented minority, I like to think that I understand all minority experiences, but that's like totally not true. So I oftentimes when I hear someone say something, I'm like, oh, that doesn't match with my experience. I try to like reframe it as like, oh, if somebody like was telling me, like I'll reframe a gender issue in terms of race, so it like clicks for me, because like I intuitively understand being an underrepresented minority who like has fears that like police will, attack me. Yeah. So oftentimes when I hear a woman saying that doesn't feel safe in her office, I might not intuitively understand that, but I can reframe it in a way that makes sense to me.
Powerful. Yes. As someone who has 2 brothers and a father I deeply respect and honor, and uncle, and that's a very real and present concern and fear. So yeah, I hadn't put it in that thought quite. I want to go a little bit into the conversation around, I think we talked about backstage the letter from President Obama that was really talking about like, the work continues and the work is waiting for you, and this importance of thinking about, creating technology that serves a higher purpose, essentially. And so I'd love to hear your thoughts on, a lot of what you're doing is enablement, right? And so you could have continued down a pretty lucrative path of working, you've been at very early stages at these massive tech companies. I think any recruiter in the room would be like, so Makinde, let's talk. So tell us a little bit about like why, what is the bigger picture here and the opportunity for making things tech that matters?
Yeah, this will sound like a little bit of a cliched story, but it's like very real in my life. My sister lives in South Africa, and I went to visit her a few years ago. And, of course, you learn about Nelson Mandela while you're there. Gandhi also spent some time in South Africa. And what struck me, like hit me like a ton of bricks, was these weren't people who were born to be leaders and to change the world, and they came out of middle school writing 10-page speeches, right? These were regular people living their regular lives who saw something and said, I'm gonna do something small about that thing, right? And then it snowballed from there, right? Their first thing wasn't, a huge march. It was a small, I'm going to attend a march, right? So it really impressed upon me that the people who make a really big impact in the world aren't the people who were necessarily born to do that. They're just like regular people living their lives who saw a problem and did something about it, right? And I really came back from that trip saying like, hey, it's time for me to do something. Like, what is that thing? And I think the other thing that sort of comes to mind is just starting small. Like, if I'm honest, like if you ask me day one, like, oh, how big would DevColor be? I don't know, but I see those 10 people over there, and I want to get dinner with them. So you don't have to have this like super big plan. You can start with what's in front of you and help one person or talk to the one person, and then go from there.
So speaking of, how big is DevColor now? So you looked around, you took every Black engineer you knew, which was like 11 people. How big is it? How big is the San Francisco chapter, not including New York?
Yeah, the San Francisco chapter is just over 150 people now.
3 years. That's in 3 years.
Oh yeah, and we're looking to grow some more. So one thing I'm going to be doing in the next couple of weeks is I will be on a lot of flights, going to Seattle, Boston, DC, and Atlanta to host events there to explore if we can expand into those cities in 2019. Yeah.
I know someone you should talk to. I'm looking at you, Adrisha, for Atlanta. Okay. We've talked about that. I want to talk a little bit. So Tiffany was up here before lunch, and similarly, the human utility went into Y Combinator, which is obviously one of the toughest incubators to get into. You went into Y Combinator as well. Can you talk a little bit about how important it is for us as a community, and specifically venture capital, to invest so that more innovative ideas like this can become possible?
Yeah, I think it's absolutely important for all of us to participate, to find funding, and to go through top tier programs like YC. If I can tell a quick story about my time in YC. I showed up in YC having gone to MIT, worked at Facebook, Dropbox, and Pinterest. And I showed up on day one and I was like, whoa, I don't belong here. These people are all really good, and somebody made a mistake and let me in. And it's like imposter syndrome at its core. It's like, how on earth did that happen? So I think it's important for more of us to be there, because when I saw familiar faces, I was like, okay, I can do this, right? Like, this is a place for me. Oh, there's Michael Seibel. He happens to be like my group facilitator. Okay, I can do this. So I think it's really important for lots of us to be there, which makes it easier for even more of us to be there. And that's a huge place where a capital is being built. So those are networks, those are opportunities that we need to be participating in.
So one of the things that Tiffany talked about was, and a question that came from the audience too, was like, how are you quantifying back to the VC community return on investment? And sort of like, there are things that are more important than just 1 billion users. And how do you think about scale differently when you're thinking about human impact? And so how do you think about that? And what have those conversations been like for you?
Yeah, it's a really interesting thing, right? Like, YC is trying to get you to have your organization or company choose one metric, put it on a graph, and make it go like that, right?
Hockey stick.
Yes, exactly. Which is tough for a nonprofit. I do think it was super important that they asked those questions and tried to push all of us into that mold, while I resisted it at the time. And I'm like, you can't measure like good feelings and inclusiveness. And they just said, shut up, Makinde. What's your number? Show me the graph. And it took us a while, but we actually did get there, right? Like, now we have a big graph in our office about props, right? Like, how often people are getting helped in our network. So I do think it is important, even if it's not revenue, to quantify the impact that you're trying to have, and to figure out, how can I measure it? Because if you can measure it really well, then it's easier to grow it. It's easier to try experiments and see what works and what doesn't work, and ultimately have more of the impact that you're trying to have.
So we're going to open it up for questions here in a minute, and we'll take like one or two. But One thing I do want to ask you is, obviously for Tech Superwomen, this is about what works and what matters. And what I love about DevColor is you're an intersection of both, right? And in a time when we know a lot of diversity reports are revealing it's been hard and progress maybe isn't going at the pace that it needs to or that people even within those organizations would like it to. And yet, I would say you're delivering real results. So what are some of the things that you observe about what works that people should think about scaling or taking on?
Yeah, this is maybe sort of a meta answer, but I really believe in starting small. So a lot of these efforts are trying to say, how do we move our percentage of Black and Latinx engineers from 1% to 10%? When the reality is at a lot of companies, it's like you're trying to hire your second Black or Latinx engineer, right? It's like, do that, right? Like, don't always aim for this like super lofty thing, especially if you're a random individual on the engineering team, right? Like, figure out like what small goal you might be able to reach. It might be finding another Black or Latinx engineer on your team and making sure that you're supporting them and they have clear goals for themselves. It might be helping to source folks and like reaching some goal of 10 referrals or something like that, right? Like, start small, start with what's around you and try to make an impact on one person. And I found that that's actually like super rewarding personally, but also can have a really deep impact on one person.
Okay, we are going to take one or two quick questions. Molly is right there. Thank you, Molly.
Thank you. This is fantastic. Really, I want to give you props. Okay, amazing work. Yeah. What kind of struck me is your requirements, the criteria, and I wonder, how do you measure ambition, or how do you validate that?
Yeah, it's a good question, and some people need to be are ambitious but haven't been pushed yet. So we ask a lot of sort of free response questions on our application about, hey, when is the last time you pushed yourself and did something beyond what you were required to at work? Or tell me about a side project. We try to give you lots of opportunities to show your passion and show what you're hungry to accomplish. It's not an exact science, but there's actually enough signal in even asking a question like that that we're able to separate the folks who want to take this seriously and want to get a lot out of it from the people who are just looking for somewhere to hang out.
What's the rate at which you're not ambitious enough?
I think.
Can you repeat the question?
What is the rate of people who are not ambitious enough? I think that initial filter cuts out about 20% of applicants. But it's hard to take a lot of insight from that specific number because our messaging ahead of the application also conveys a lot of what you need. So a lot of people self-select out before completing the application.
You're attracting a certain type. Okay, so Makinde, in our final moment, and we'll end here. Any closing thoughts for, I think especially for organizations or individuals who are struggling to figure out how to do D&I well? What would you say?
Yeah, for trying to do D&I well, I've worked with lots of companies on D&I efforts, and I think it comes down to really, most people here are technical, so I actually just take an engineering approach, which is like, hey, step one, let's not just throw buzzwords at the wall and figure out what trainings or things we need. Let's define specifically what problem we're trying to solve. Have a hypothesis of what might solve that problem. Try something in a month, and then iterate from there. And I've seen a lot of companies have more success that way than trying to sort of set a 1 or 2 year roadmap. It's just being really specific about the problem you're trying to solve. You might have a lot of problems, but it's hard to solve them all at once. So just pick one that you think is biggest impact for your organization, start there, and start with a small experiment, and iterate from there.
Love that. Please give me a hand and thank you, Makinde.